So there's this movement happening lately for me that I wanted to share a little bit about. And it's something that is actually, I touched on in a previous video, and it, for me, was quite surprising and defeating, uncomfortable, irritating, all of the above. And that is like a movement of a full embracing of humanness. And when like this first, call it like first stage of awakening, maybe like a mind awakening, started happening, and there was a realization that I am emptiness, I do not exist, etc. There's a really something really comforting in that, because it's almost an escape. It's like an escape hatch. A way to, or it can be like a way to bypass or avoid all of the conditioning and patterns and egoic tendencies. And this movement that's happening lately is almost like a turnaround, where it's like it's coming back for all of the places where it's seen that there's still stuckness, that there's still loops being spun on, and there's still wheels being like merry-go-rounds being spun on and ridden. And these are really old patterns. I can trace them back to childhood and call it trauma, call it whatever suits your fancy. But this movement of embracing humanness is very counterintuitive in spirituality, and what brought me to spirituality, and I think what probably brings a lot of people to spirituality, is seeking to transcend suffering, to end suffering. And especially as someone, if you're someone who's had a difficult life or a lot of difficult experiences, the idea of that is very alluring. And so that first stage of like transcendence, just like a dropping into an emptiness and seeing the falseness of the stories and the personality and all those things, is really, really lovely and really comforting. And it can be very it can feel very alluring to stay there. It can be very tempting to stay there in that emptiness as a bypass, because there's still things that arise, and it gets easy after you've felt that transcendence and after you know it on a very deep level. It gets easy when something arises to just say, that's not true. That's not true. It's not real. It's a dream. All those things. Guilty of that. And yet there they are arising. And there's something more that's being asked. And I heard this concept that I really love. It was either Adyashanti or Mukti. I don't remember which. I think perhaps they both speak to this, but that every energy is seeking its own liberated state. So every time something cyclic arises, say, you can call it like, you can say that you get triggered in a moment, or an agitation arises, or a frustration or an anger, or especially when it's something that seems to arise again and again, in various situations, you could go the rest of your life just saying, that's not true, that's not true. And eventually it'll go away, but it'll come back. But what that is pointing to, like the continual arising of those energies, what that seems to be pointing to is to move towards them. But it's in a completely different way, or what I'm finding is that it's in a completely different way. So there's been this movement where, or I suppose just as a personal example of a very deep pattern in my own life is suppression. You know, a minor frustration, the conditioning has been to suppress, let it go, no big deal. And essentially an orientation in my conditioning towards external factors, towards other people, and what my character thinks that they want, or what my character senses that they might be open to in a moment, and orienting around that. But what I didn't realize, what I have recently really come to see, is how much I was doing. Basically I was orienting externally to the exclusion of internal. But there is no internal and external. So because it's all what is, it's all truth, call it whatever you like, it's all reality. There's no internal and external. That divide is false. It's illusory. So to focus on one to the exclusion of the other is to create a divide, to create separation where separation does not actually exist, and therein to create suffering. And that was a hard one for me to see, honestly, because those super, super dark hiding places had been hidden for so long. This metaphor that I've shared with Henry recently is, my conditioning was kind of to create an island around myself, and to tell myself that nobody can get to me. I'm different. My life is different. I can't be understood. I don't fit in with people. And, and there's ways that is accurate, that feels true in various moments. That story, has found evidence in certain ways. I think I just forgot what I was talking about. There's ways that those stories have found evidence. Those patterns have found evidence. That suppression, that conditioned suppression. So to see that I have, that I am responsible for perpetuating that illusory separation by falsely dividing inside and outside and treating them differently, has been very humbling, very difficult to accept. And what has been called for, what has arisen, is a really deep dive into those really dark places. So for me, that has been anger. So specific emotions, and you can say that it could be just sensations. It could be argued that emotions are concepts that are built around physical sensations, but whatever you would like to call it, you don't have to use words to communicate. Call it anger. My conditioning has been to suppress at all costs. At all costs. Anger is bad. And in that, creating a fracture, an internal fracture, an internal divide, internal division. And in that division between inside and outside. So this, emotional type work is really interesting, because what happened initially was that the lid kind of got pulled off that suppression and swung in the opposite direction, where it was just like a volcano spewing, or, I've heard this metaphor, a 2-liter bottle of Coke that's been shaken up for 30 some odd years, and suddenly the top's taken off, or the volcano suddenly erupts, and has been this unencumbered spewing. Still various ways that there's been some resistance to that, and almost like working the kinks of that resistance through my system and through the body, and finding that, almost like finding a free flowing of that energy. But now, as that kind of like eruption has settled and is starting to settle, what's coming online, and this has arisen previously with different things, but it feels so different when it's something that is so deeply ingrained, that is so unconscious. It feels very interesting and very challenging to learn to hold this. So essentially it's like learning to hold these aspects of myself. So I wanted to believe that me was always kind. That me, Jennifer, was, that had it together. That was, Jennifer was under control. That Jennifer didn't lose her cool. And it's all of it, every aspect. So every aspect that we hate in others, you can say like every heinous behavior that any human has ever perpetrated lives here also. And until we can find those places, illuminate them, and allow them to allow them to let go into them, there can't be liberation. There can't be freedom. So what that's looked like here is learning to hold things very differently. So it's this really interesting balance of, as an energy arises, call it anger in a moment, because suppression hasn't worked. And I also realize now, after that lid, after that suppression function broke, and there was just like that kind of like unencumbered free spewing, that also doesn't work. There's something different that's being asked, and it's in between, and it's very counterintuitive. So the resistance or the suppression is essentially pushing that energy away, saying like, I don't like that, this is bad. And it's essentially categorizing it, putting it into a concept, putting it into a box. And then the spewing and like essentially getting swept up in it is kind of letting that energy take over you. And that's when, like, in both of those is the realm of unconsciousness, in letting it overtake, and then also resisting and suppressing. Those are both unconscious actions. And the place that lies in the middle is essentially, kind of what, meditation maybe points to. I've been doing some Vipassana, which has been, a really wonderful tool, and various somatic and body-based modalities and things like that, where it's not indulging the energy, which would be to get swept up in it. And say, like, as an example with anger, getting swept up in it would look like maybe yelling or losing your temper, or what have you. And then suppressing would be to resist that energy. But the place in between would just be simply to, it doesn't necessarily have to be sitting or meditating, but essentially creating a space, creating like this neutral container where the energy is felt completely, but it is neither resisted nor indulged. It's not, categorized. So the indulgence is getting swept up in it, is essentially becoming it, and the resistance is pushing it away. But there's something in between. So that in-between space is, might look like, think about, as an example, sitting with somebody who's upset, who maybe you don't know very well at all, or maybe in a movie. I feel like this might be a good example. So watching a show or a movie, and a character is really upset, and there's no tug, there's no attachment inside to that person's experience, to the energy that's arising in them. You're able to remain neutral in the face of that. And it's bringing that same energy within yourself and holding that space inside yourself for yourself. So finding that neutrality. So it's dropping into, what some teachers call the ground of being, which is, maybe, feeling your feet, or feeling the breath like deep in your belly, and staying grounded. So staying attuned to a sense of grounding in the body, and also allowing like that anger, which would come up and move through a sensation in the body, to be felt simultaneously. So it's not indulging it, and it's not pushing it away. It's allowing it to dance its dance in the light of full consciousness. And that is what liberates it. That is what liberates the energy. And that's fucking hard to implement. It's hard to do in practice, because that unconsciousness, those unconscious actions, it's so easy and so ingrained and so habituated to just slip right into it. And it's, I wouldn't even say that it's something I've actively cultivated. It's just almost like following impulses, and it's naturally started happening. And as there's been more practicing, it's happening more and more. And it's really, really interesting and really wonderful to feel the ways that is freeing internally. And it's integrating all of those disparate pieces that have been cast aside, and acknowledging and recognizing that everything lives here, that I am not any of them. And in doing this, it's also realizing at a very deep fundamental level that I, Jennifer, who I've always thought myself to be, has no existence. Because I had this concept of myself, of who I was, of the ways that I acted, that actually, has like some basis in reality, but is ultimately an illusion, because it was casting aside a large portion of what also arises here, and in that way was just living in a deluded state and living in a dream state and upholding falseness, projecting and portraying falseness. And that is it's a really strange thing to sit with. It's the concept, or like the knowing in the mind that I am nothing, it's that actually dropping into the body. And as you release these energies and learn to hold these emotions or these sensations with complete neutrality, it's the embodiment of being nothing, of emptiness appearing in form. And that is wild. And so this process of embodiment, of embracing humanness, is simultaneously a process of embodying the formless in form. It's embodying that paradox of nothing and everything, that what I thought I was is nothing, that I am void, I am absolute, I am stillness, I am silence, and simultaneously all of appearance, all energy arises within, arises here. And so it's that division starting to fall away. And, you know, I've had to also really come to terms with the level of arrogance in myself as an avoidance strategy, you know, kind of like projecting that I had some sort of understanding of something. And it was a, you know, like an intellectual or like a mind understanding, a mind awakening. But speaking something that I had actually not realized, which is very humbling. And so that is, you know, coming forth very strongly. And there's been, you know, I plan to probably make more videos like this, because there's a lot that I've learned, and a lot of, you know, body-based practices and ways that I have just intuitively followed the body and disidentified with the body and followed the impulses of the body without the me kind of muddling and getting in the way, that has really been helpful in this. So I'll probably just share some of those experiences, and yeah, good luck out there.